Summer of 1917. June 8th, 1917, there was a fire up the hill in the Granite Mountain Mine up in Walkerville. We can't see it from here. It's up over that away, actually. That fire ended up killing 168 underground miners. And to this day, that's the most deadly hard rock mine disaster in U.S. history. It touched off a strike, a reasonable strike for better working conditions. And like we were saying before, you might think in a town that was called the Gibraltar of unionism, you might think the unions were so powerful they'd get their way all the time. Wrong. The company was so strong, even there, or even in that situation, they're doing this divide and conquer motif. We're talking to the electricians. We might do a deal with them. But I'm not, if I'm the company, I'm not going to make any real concessions. And the strike was winding down from the early June into the middle of July, when in, I think it was the 18th of July, the IWW sent their executive director to town, a man named Frank Little. He gave speeches in the Finlander Hall. He spent his nights next door in Mrs. Burns' boarding house, also gone, basically about right there at the edge of the motel that's there today. And he's saying things like, put the managers to work down in the hole in the ground, make them actually earn a living for a change, hand them a muck stick, you know, that's a shovel, make them get blisters instead of sitting on their fat rears. There's the top of the Hennessy building right there. That's the sixth floor, the notorious sixth floor. And in fact, the sixth floor became a euphemism for, a negative euphemism for the Anaconda Company.
Same in Chicago, is where their scab herd mayor is, the sixth floor.
Yes. So that name was actually known throughout the mining industry across the United States. The sixth floor meant you were talking about the Anaconda Company, and you were talking in a less than positive way. So he's saying all this kind of stuff. I think the people of Butte probably appreciated it, the working people. They may not have completely embraced his radicalism, because he's also saying things like, you know, that the soldiers fighting in France are the Uncle Sam scabs and things like this, because the IWW's second most important premise probably was anti-war. So all of this is happening in a time when the turmoil is just, we had entered the war just in April. We're now into July, and it's got to be crazy in Butte. So after 2 weeks of this kind of talk, the company, the Anaconda Company, certainly didn't appreciate it. The night of the 1st of August, a black Cadillac pulls up right there in front of Mrs. Burns' boarding house. 6 thugs go into the boarding house and they drag Frank Little out in his night clothes.
He didn't have a gun.
If he had a gun, he wasn't able to get it.
I see.
There's a good question, and I don't know.
And he didn't barricade the door.
His grandniece is actually writing a biography. Well, it's actually the family story, but 2 or 3 chapters will be focused on Frank and what happened to him in Butte. So that should be coming out pretty soon. They did. They dragged him out. They tied him to the back of the Cadillac, dragged him through the streets of Butte. His kneecaps practically had worn off. Then they hanged him from a railroad trestle down on Silverbow Creek, where he finally died. And the violence of this murder of one of their own basically appalled the people of Butte. They knew he was on their side. Again, whether they agreed completely or not, this was just a violent, awful murder. Frank Little's funeral was huge. 12,000 people lined the streets of Butte. Close to 3,000 followed his casket down toward Mountain View Cemetery, where he's buried. And his tombstone down there reads, "Slain by capitalist interests for organizing and inspiring his fellow men."
Beautiful.
It was a big deal at the time. It was on the front page of the Berkeley, California newspaper for 7 days running. And as I was telling you earlier, I've had people who have come to Butte from places like Berlin and London, knowing nothing about Butte except that Frank Little's buried here. He remains an icon in the left socialist-leaning labor movement internationally to this day. With all that attention, you might presume there were many arrests. 0 arrests.
Of course.
No one was ever arrested. 100 years later, nearly 100 years later, we can't prove anything absolutely. I would say it's probably 95% certain that Frank Little's murder was carried out by the Butte Police Department, acting under orders from the Anaconda Company. That's how strong their control was. So this was the midpoint of an incredible time of labor unrest. We got